Joining me now is Gordon Chang. He's a contributor at Forbes.com, World Affairs Journal, and he's also the author of a great book, The Coming Collapse of China. Gordon, welcome. Good to see you again, my friend.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Let's start with the obvious place to start. Now that Trump has been elected president, the press, at least, is near hysterical about the coming trade war with China. A lot in Silicon Valley seem to think there's a coming trade war with China. So you are the foremost China expert that I know. Are we headed into a trade war with China, in fact, Gordon?
No, we're not. We're already in a trade war with China, but only one side is waging it, the Chinese. So Trump can't start a trade war. Now, this is not to say that Trump can't make mistakes, but nonetheless, the United States needs to do something because we are bleeding. China's becoming increasingly mercantilist. They're closing off opportunities for American companies in China. And as well, through cyber means, it is stealing hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. intellectual property each year. The estimates run from somewhere between $300 to $500 billion. It's a lot of money. So we're already bleeding.
Yeah, and the truth is China needs us. And Gordon, I mean, we go into these negotiations, and there will be negotiations, not necessarily a trade war. We go in with some leverage, as a matter of fact, don't we?
We go in with all the leverage, Bill, because last year, U.S. trade deficit with China, both goods and services, was $334.1 billion. This year is going to be about the same. That gives us 334.1 billion reasons why we've got leverage and they don't. Actually, the Chinese can huff and puff like they did a couple days ago in that Global Times article where they threatened retaliation against Boeing, Apple, and American farmers. And yeah, they can impose some costs on us. But we are beyond the point where there are no-cost solutions. We are going to hurt. But the question is, we're already hurting now, so we've got to do something.
Well, as a matter of fact, the hurt in the retaliation. Right now, if you are a company that invests in China, and correct me if I'm wrong, you cannot repatriate that capital back. You can't take those profits back to the country from which you are in. You have to, in fact, leave it in China. Products leaving China face a tariff, or we face a tariff sending money in goods into China. China effectively faces no barriers of entry to our market whatsoever, correct?
Oh, that's correct. The U.S. is one of the most open markets anywhere, which is really good in one sense because it means we're very efficient. But it also means that countries like China have very little incentive, actually, to have trade deals with us because they got everything or they got most of what they want. With China, there are now strict and actually even more strict rules on repatriation of capital. Largely because, the renminbi, the Chinese currency, is so weak that they are informally imposing restrictions that are not on the books. So China's got a real problem in this regard. But you're absolutely right. This is not an open economy, and companies have a hard time getting capital out of China. They really discourage it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are really confused when they hear these discussions. Why is it so important to China? You mentioned the weak currency. Why is it important to China to keep control on that currency?
Well, because last year there was net capital outflow of perhaps as much as $1 trillion, according to Bloomberg. And if their currency goes weaker, it means that people will have even more incentive to smuggle money out. This year, the outflow could very well be the same as last year, and it's certainly accelerating in the later quarters of this year. So there's a real sense of pessimism that is growing in China, and that's why China right now is manipulating its currency. It's not forcing it to an artificially low level like it did for decades. Right now, the Chinese currency is at artificially high level because they're trying to prevent the money from leaving the country.
Well, it strikes me the one sort of area of danger that we might face here, and perhaps you can comment on how we should proceed, is that China is in the midst of a militaristic expansion period. They are increasingly moving further and further out, seeking not only to expand the sphere of influence, but their actual physical sphere as well. Do they still have a weak economy, and does that make China a little more dangerous to deal with? given a shaky or weak economy and this period of militarism they're going through?
Yeah, the answer to those is both. Yes, China's economy is not growing at the 6.7% pace that they claimed improbably for each of the 3 quarters of this year. It's perhaps half that, maybe even less. Some people make the argument there's zero growth right now. So, essentially there's a real problem there, and they don't know what to do. Or actually, they do know what to do, but their political constraints prevent them from doing things like reform. And that means the Communist Party, whose legitimacy for more than 3 decades was primarily based on the continual delivery of prosperity, means that without prosperity, the only remaining basis of legitimacy is nationalism. And that's why I think it's one of the reasons why, and perhaps the main reason why, China has been much more provocative, much more belligerent over the last several years. This is occurring at the same time China's going through a leadership transition, which is certainly roiling the political system as Xi Jinping, the ruler, tries to break decades-old norms that were designed to ensure stability.
What would your advice to be if President-elect Trump called you up and said, Gordon, where do we start? How do we start this conversation, and what should our number one priority be? What advice would you give him?
Well, the number one priority is not the currency, because he's famously said that he would declare China a currency manipulator on day one. I wouldn't go there because, as I mentioned, they're pushing the currency artificially higher. I think the most important thing is to talk for the new president to talk about across-the-board tariffs as the opening negotiating position. That's certainly justifiable because of what China is doing. And they need to see an act of political will on the part of an American president. They haven't seen it in this administration. They didn't see it in the one before. And so they actually have a pretty low picture of American leadership. They don't think very much of us. I think that they need to see a tough action from President Trump and the follow-through and the willingness to take political pain, because there will be tit-for-tat retaliation. We know the Chinese have already talked about it. They're certainly good at doing that. They've done it before. So basically, they need to see a president who is absolutely determined to defend America's economy and American companies.
Well, it's been my experience that the Chinese understand, they recognize and understand strength in the world, and I think President-elect Trump intends to offer that. All right, Gordon, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. Wonderful as always to see you. And remember, you can read Gordon's latest piece over at the dailybeast.com. You can find Gordon in a lot of places. It's worth your time to go look up his article. Thank you, Gordon.